Well, welcome to another episode of Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today I'm going to be continuing to talk about a theme that I've talked about before on the program, and it's the theme of what's happening at Wheaton College these days. Wheaton College is my old alma mater, and I have been following what's happening at Wheaton College these days as they have gone on the social justice warrior route, and they have emphasized all of the talking points of the left and the leftist ideology, including the racial critical theories, the sort of leftist talking points and vocabulary about gender diversity. And here I want to review another article in the alumni magazine at Wheaton College on diversity, the so-called diversity theme. The article is called Diversity Matters. That's the article that is appearing in the alumni magazine in 2018, the spring of 2018. And I just wanted to read this article and interact with it because I'm sad to say that Wheaton has basically thrown its hat into the ring of the social justice warrior mentality, and they have adopted pretty much the standard toolbox of the leftists in describing diversity, white privilege, patriarchy, white oppression, and all of the buzzwords and buzz phrases that you will hear at a secular university, you will hear at Wheaton College, unfortunately, these days. So I wanted to give you an example of this in this article. It says, the article is entitled Diversity Matters in Student Development, a conversation between Rodney Cisco, 84, and Allison Ash about ethnic diversity at Wheaton College. A new book, Diversity Matters, Race, Ethnicity, and the Future of Christian Higher Education, features essays from professors and scholars across the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, including Wheaton College. And two Wheaton College staff members contributed chapters. Director of Office of Multicultural Development, Rodney Cisco, 84, and Dean of Student Care and Graduate Student Life, Allison Ash. So two Wheaton professors are going to be talking about racial ethnic diversity. It says, this book was produced at a time when Wheaton became, because of its renewed focus upon ethnic diversity, had a unique opportunity to contribute to the CCCU dialogue. And that's correct. Wheaton has a emphasis these days, it's been going on since 2011, of ethnic diversity. I don't know exactly what prompted this. It might be their accreditation from the accrediting bureau wanted to see more diversity on campus. Maybe that was one of the criticisms of Wheaton College. It was seen as too white, too middle class, upper middle class, whatever. But there's an emphasis now on ethnic and gender diversity. It says that as part of From the Heart for the Kingdom capital campaign, donors gave over $8 million to further fund Wheaton College's strategic priority of deepening ethnic diversity on campus, a campaign priority that began in 2011. The new fund will provide opportunities for students to explore biblical understanding of diversity in the classroom. Biblical understanding of diversity in the classroom. So that should be interesting. And will expand Wheaton's ability to offer diversity-focused scholarships and to increase the presence of people of color in the student body, the faculty, and the administration. This is what I talked about before. There's going to be some kind of a quota system, percentile, that there needs to be a certain percentile of African Americans. There needs to be a certain percentile of Asian Americans. There needs to be a certain percentile of Latino Americans, and so on and so forth. We've seen this before. This has been happening on college campuses for at least 2 or 3 decades. And actually that method of achieving diversity has come under fire from the courts and actually has reached the Supreme Court because there are lawsuits in the courts today even that are charging that some of these universities and colleges are discriminating. It's kind of a reverse discrimination. And so it's odd that Wheaton should be lagging up from the behind in doing these methods that are actually coming under criticism from secular people these days, but they're doing it. Wheaton also recently announced the hire of the first chief intercultural engagement officer, Sheila Caldwell, who will begin in June, serving on the senior administrative cabinet alongside President Wheaton. Dr. Caldwell will work to frame a vision for biblical diversity. I hope she really does form a biblical diversity frame, and not just a secular social justice warrior diversity plan, because it looks like and it sounds like, because of all of the language and vocabulary that's being used at Wheaton College, it looks like there's more secular input than there is biblical input, but we'll get to that. Dr. Caldwell will work to frame a vision of biblical diversity, racial unity, and intercultural understanding on campus. To learn more about the ethnic diversity and student development at Wheaton, I sat down with Cisco and Ash late in 2017 as Wheaton continues to pursue ethnic diversity and participate in the broader conversation as part of the 180-member CCCU. Following the abridged transcript of our discussion provides a inside look at where we are today. So let's go on into the article. Rodney Cisco. The section of the book that I contributed to is called Why We Stayed, Lessons in Resilience and Leadership from Long-Term CCCU Diversity Professionals. What's kept me working in higher education? Excuse me. What's kept me working in higher education beyond the 3 to 4 year average? I love music, so I frame my chapter in terms of Take 5 by Dave Brubeck Quartet. There's a consistent section and another section that moves all over. For me, longevity has been about finding that balance between consistency and artistry. Consistency is in the shared sense of responsibility with the institution and me. Artistry is the unique and creative ways in which we find to do the work. And then Allison Ash says, my chapter, Identity Awareness and Engagement, Understanding My Whiteness, is on being a white ally working for justice and racial equality. So here we have another buzzword that is really big in the social justice warrior camp, and that is an ally. And an ally is someone who is not a person of color, and yet they say that they're going to work with people of color in the social justice warrior movement. And so, in other words, if you would be a white ally, if you were someone who would, for example, march in a Black Lives Matter protest, or if you were to join in with Antifa and you're a white person, you would be an ally. So that's something that is well known in the social justice warrior vocabulary, but it may not be known a lot in the regular community at large, because most people don't talk in terms of being an ally of this cause or that. She says, I wrote about having a sense of righteous anger and some of the dangers of just jumping in and trying to make a change without having an awareness of racial injustice. When I first started talking about race, it was like I was attempting to run a marathon, but I had never trained to be a runner. Okay, so she's an ally. And then Rodney Cisco says, I remember there was a time when, as an African-American chapel speaker went on stage, you would hear a collective groan. Students would get up and leave. When there used to be a week of diversity chapel, you would see those being some of the most skipped chapels. And if you were to look at the record of chapel attendance, especially 10 or 15 years ago, you would see this consistently. If it's a minority speaker, chapel attendance would be lower. There's a part of me that got frustrated saying, help me understand why you're leaving chapel just because the speaker isn't white. And generally the response was something like, oh, well, he or she is going to bash us on something and make us feel bad as bad white people. Well, there's a lot of truth to that response. I have spent the last few summers attending some of the chapel services over at Chautauqua Institution, and they have, on a regular basis, all kinds of ethnically diverse speakers, and it's almost a guarantee, 100% guarantee, that if the speaker is an African-American speaker, they are going to be talking down at the white people in the audience, bashing the white people, telling them you have white privilege, you are part of the oppressive majority, and so on and so forth. It's just, you really get tired of hearing someone assuming all kinds of things about you because you're white. In other words, very racist messages, taking a broad brush and painting it on all white people do this and all white people do that, just the very thing that we're supposed to be discouraging. Whenever these African-American speakers speak over at Chautauqua Institution, which is here in southern tier of New York, then you get that white bashing opportunity. And I understand what these students are going through and what the response was. And now here's Rodney Sisko's response to that. I can't help but wonder, where's the thick skin? Because we've been made, that's the African Americans, have been made to feel bad about who we are for generations. In other words, so what? So what if the speakers are bashing white people as a race? We've had to suffer so much over the generations, and you guys need to just sit there and suffer a little bit now too, because you deserve it. In other words, that's not a Christian attitude. First of all, it shouldn't be the case that every time an African American speaks in chapel, they have to talk about racial reconciliation, white oppression, white dominance, black victimization, and so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be that way. There are all kinds of topics. They don't have to always try to browbeat their audience into some kind of change in which they see should happen. And that would go a long way to helping people really understand some of the problems that we really do have to face. But if you're going to come at someone always in this offensive posture, and you're always going to look down and judge people about their, quote, whiteness, yeah, you're going to get a negative reaction. And I understand what these students are saying to him, and I don't understand his reaction, saying, well, why don't you have thicker skin? Well, why do they have to sit there and listen to this? First of all, it's leftist. A lot of it's leftist propaganda. It's not really constructive solutions to these problems. I don't know if a lot of people realize, but there are creative solutions to these problems, and they don't involve radical left-wing liberal techniques. And I think there's a one-sidedness to the Wheaton College project that I don't think is really helpful. He goes on, I'm a big black man, so I've gotten used to people making ignorant, racist assumptions about me. I joke about them now, the walk down the street and the lock of the car doors as I go by. The women pull their purses to their sides, the person who crosses the street just because I'm walking in front of them. But for crying out loud, what did I do? Well, guess what? Everybody has those moments when you are walking down the street and something happens and you can be made to feel bad because you're the person that somebody might be afraid of, or you're the person somebody might not understand why you're there. I mean, hey, as a man, as a male in the United States, if I'm walking down a sidewalk at night and a woman comes out of the department store and she starts walking in the same direction I'm walking ahead of me, I feel sometimes like I am the object of her fear because she's looking nervous, like, what am I going to do? And I'm just walking down the street. So there are all kinds of situations in life where we all feel like maybe we're being treated unfairly or assumptions of other people are wrong about us. Okay, it isn't because of your race. It isn't because of the color of your skin all the time. And I think there's a lot of misinterpreting that's going on here and a lot of assumptions that are not exactly true. For example, there doesn't have to be, every time an African-American speaker comes to chapel, he doesn't have to talk about race. This is something that really needs to be dealt with and talked about. It's like you don't have to take every opportunity to tell people about how much you suffer or you're a victim or you're being discriminated against or people owe you this and owe you that. This is not helpful. And to see it come to Wheaton College is really too bad. And then it says, then you have things that have happened with police. We have a wonderful chief of police now, but in the past, we've had students of color walking across campus when a police cruiser starts following them. Eventually, the police will say, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" If the students let us know, we would follow up with the police, but often students are embarrassed and internalize it. That's where Wheaton was, especially in the early years of my tenure. I had a clear sense of be happy, you're welcome as a guest, as opposed to this is your home as well. It is the sum of microaggressions, a combination of small and subtle things that are tiring. Microaggressions. Here's another buzzword of the social justice warrior camp. A microaggression. It's anytime you are made to feel uncomfortable and you attribute it to race or gender. So you can have all kinds of microaggressions against you. And guess what? It happens to everybody. It's not just people of color. It's not just to women. It's actually occurring all the time to white males also, the dreaded white male. Again, what happens is you get this whole ideology building up, and the boogeyman, the worst person in the room, is always the white man. And so you have to beat up on the white man. You have to blame him for all of society's woes because he's the oppressor and other people are victims. And so you start thinking like this social justice warrior mentality, this critical Marxist theory, this critical race theory. You start thinking with feminist theological categories. You start thinking of the leftist, radical left, so-called progressive ideology. And this is where you get. And I'm sad to say that Wheaton College is buying into the whole lot of it. And they need to really take a break. They need to step back. They need to look at what they're doing. They need to consider that maybe, just maybe, that the radical left doesn't have a monopoly on the word justice, and that they need to listen to biblical voices, more authentic biblical voices, and not just assume that every time the word justice is used, it's defined in the way the leftists do. This is a big trap that a lot of Christian institutions, I'm afraid, are falling into. They say, okay, we want to be a part of justice in society. Okay, so then what they do is they load up on this leftist propaganda because that's the most prolific definitions of these categories right now in society. It's all over the place. It's in the universities. It's on colleges, the big institutions, corporate America, most of the government. It's all over the place. And so it's very easy to say, okay, if you talk about justice, you're talking social justice warrior. No, you can't go into that category automatically. If you do, you're going to distort a lot of things. And you're actually going to destroy a lot of good, healthy organizations in the process, because then you're looking for race as the problem. You're looking for gender as the problem. And you're looking for the person, and you're looking for enemies, and then you're forming allies, and you're dividing organizations, you're dividing the country, you're dividing ethnic groups one against the other. And this all goes back to the Marxist understanding of analysis. You have the synthesis and the antithesis, and you have to create divisions, because out of the clash of that comes something different, a change is created, and so forth. So unfortunately, Wheaton College has bought into the whole social justice warrior mentality. Okay, he goes on. But I'm a perpetual optimist, so I've never given up. I've been fairly consistent all my life as a peacemaker. Okay, great. If you're a peacemaker, then don't take the side of the social justice warrior mentality that is creating division in our society and can create actually division on the campus of a college like Wheaton College by using inflammatory, accusatory terminology like whiteness and white privilege and all of these so-called important categories that actually are judgmental. They're broad brushing an entire population. They're addressing, for example, the big trend now is for social justice warriors to talk to, quote, white people. You know, I want to talk to you white people. In other words, just this big generalization, this big racist comment, you know, and that's okay. Supposedly that's okay, but actually that's terrible. That's awful. That's actually racist. How will we work this out together? How do we find this space that we can gain from, that we can both learn from? And then Allison Ash says, I believe that my perspective as a white ally during this work is likely different from that of a person of color who has experienced racism. If racism is represented by what's below the surface of an ocean, white people are often in a submarine. Oh, that's a nice illustration. They can say, oh, that's terrible, but not actually experience it. What Wheaton students of color meet with me and tell me in their stories, there's a uniqueness to what they experience compared to others in the community. As long as we continue to have students of color who say, because of my race, it's hard to be here, we have work to do. Well, it's hard to be at Wheaton for everyone, whether they're a student of color or a student of not color, or if you're a freshman, it's hard to be there. If you're a sophomore, it's hard to be there. It's hard to be there as a student with the high academic standards and all of the pressures of a college student. It's hard to be there for everyone. I don't think that this really is addressing the issues that come up. Rodney Stark says, we've come immensely far, though, even if we still have a long way to go. Okay, yeah, we've heard that. Our collective responsibility is to make sure students of color find a community that is a safe place to be. Well, that should always be the goal. But you don't have to use the categories of the social justice warrior camp to do that. You don't have to use the analysis, the Marxist analysis. You don't have to approach it from this leftist perspective. That's the problem. That's the problem. Allison Ash, I think it's important that we move away from a deficient mindset. Instead of only focusing on supporting students of color because of the assumptions about the challenges they face, it will help to move to a development mindset, focusing on educating the whole community on what racism is and our country's history of racism, and continuing to expose our students to the biblical imperative for kingdom justice and ethnic diversity. Our work is going to the problem and talking about how to mitigate it and change it. That's what I would hope that Wheaton College would actually dive into the Bible's understanding of a just society. The Bible's commands to love one another and use the language of the Bible to address these issues, not the language of the secular left, not the language of secular sociology, not the language of secular politics, not the language of the neo-Marxist critical theory and all of the writers that are out there today. That's what I would hope would happen. But unfortunately, as she's saying that we need to use the Bible and look at it from a biblical viewpoint, she's going along and using the language and the categories of the neo-Marxist critical social theories. And she may not even know it. I don't know if she's done any reading in Karl Marx. I don't know if she has done much reading in socialism. When I was a student at Wheaton College in philosophy, I took a class in Marxism. I understand this perspective. I also took a class in seminary on liberation theology in Latin America. And if you look at liberation theology, that is an attempt to use Karl Marx's analysis of society and try to come up with solutions using his analysis. And it was a very big movement there in the 80s and 90s in Latin America, especially among the Roman Catholic priests down there. And they used the language oftentimes of Christianity, but they made it into a Marxist tool, or they took Marxist tools and used biblical language. And unfortunately, I'm seeing the social justice movement at Wheaton College now using the same technique. They're taking Marxist categories, their sociological categories, thoroughly secular categories of looking at human beings and society, and they're taking the biblical languages of justice and compassion and all kinds of other categories that we do see in the Bible, and they're simply transferring the language of the Bible over into Marxist categories, and that's the problem. So I think over at Wheaton College, they need to back up and they say, well, wait a minute, are we falling into this trap? Are we falling into the fallacy of using language that comes from our Bible, but filling it in with categories that come nowhere from our Bible, in fact, actually oppose the teachings of the Bible? And I think that if they stopped and asked that question, they would find that, yes, they are appropriating tools and methods and analysis that are incompatible with a truly biblical worldview.